The Alpha King was halfway through rejecting me in front of the entire court when I realized he'd made one fatal mistake. He thought I came here to beg. The acceptance hall was packed with witnesses from rival territories, nobles whispering behind jeweled fans, all waiting to watch an Omega break under the weight of public humiliation. Kaylor's voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling as he declared me unworthy, unfit, a clerical error the moon had inflicted upon a king who deserved better. But I'd spent 3 years in the royal archives, and I knew something he'd forgotten. Reciprocal rejection was still law, and the moment I invoked it, the moon altar itself reacted. The silver inlay went black, the ceremonial fires guttered, and every wolf in that hall realized I hadn't come to accept my fate. I'd come to destroy his. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother once said I'd never reach 1,000 subscribers. But I believe stories like this, the quiet ones, the forbidden ones, the ones that burn slowly in the dark, deserve to be heard. Subscribe to Midnight Stories and help turn whispered tales into something that can't be ignored. Comment below what time and where you are watching from. Now, let's continue. The bond is called sacred in every hymn, but sacred things are easiest to weaponize when an entire room is trained to obey one voice. The acceptance hall wasn't built for intimacy. It was built for erasure. Salis understood that the moment she saw the envoys from the Eastern Pact seated in the gallery, their formal silks and polished insignias catching torchlight like predator eyes. This wasn't supposed to be a private rite between mates. This was theatre, a public lesson designed to remind every wolf in the Northern Realm what happened when the moon's will contradicted an Alpha King's pride. Alpha King Kaylor. Vern stood on the raised dais in full ceremonial plate, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, his expression carved from winter stone. Behind him, the moon altar gleamed with inlaid silver that seemed to pulse faintly in the firelight. The crowd packed every available space, nobles and war captains and visiting dignitaries, all positioned to witness what Kaylor had carefully framed as duty, not cruelty. Salis stood in the center of the hall in a pale dress meant for cold stone corridors, not grand ceremonies. Her hands were ink-stained from years shelving royal ledgers. Her hair hung loose, tangled from the wind outside. She looked exactly like what Kaylor needed her to be. A mistake. A clerical error the moon had inflicted upon a king who deserved better. Kaylor's voice carried across the vaulted ceiling without effort. Let it be known to all assembled here, and to our honored guests from rival territories, that the bond forced upon me by divine error must be corrected for the stability of this realm. The crowd murmured agreement. Of course it was an error. Anyone could see she didn't belong. Salis Quen, Kaylor continued, his tone sharpening, possesses none of the qualities required to stand beside a king. Her blood is common. Her education is limited to ink and parchment. She has no alliances, no dowry, no wolf strong enough to defend what she cannot even articulate. He paused, letting the insult settle like frost. She is, in every measurable way, unworthy. The bond burned in Salis's chest, a searing pull toward the man publicly dismantling her. Every instinct screamed at her to bow, to flee, to accept the script written for her by wolves who believed humiliation was tradition. But Salis had spent 3 years in the archives. She knew what tradition really was, a word powerful people used when they wanted to do something cruel without being questioned. Kaylor raised his hand. Therefore I, Kaylor Vern, Alpha King of the Northern Reach, formally reject the mate bond. Let it be severed in the eyes of this court and the moon herself. Silence fell. This was the moment. The moment where Salis was supposed to whisper her acceptance, lower her gaze, and disappear into obscurity like every other rejected Omega in the realm's 300-year history. Instead, Salis lifted her chin and met Kaylor's cold eyes directly. I, Salis Quen, accept your rejection. Alpha King Kaylor Vierne. Her voice carried, steady and clear, nothing like the broken whisper they expected. "And I reject you in return." The gasps were immediate. Nobles jerked upright in their seats. The Eastern envoys leaned forward, suddenly alert. Even the guards along the walls shifted, uncertain whether they'd just witnessed history or treason. Kaylor's expression transformed from smug satisfaction to shock, then rapidly darkened into something far more dangerous. But before he could speak, the hall itself reacted. The moon altar's silver inlay blackened for one breath, as if scorched by invisible fire. The ceremonial torches guttered and flared, casting wild shadows across the stone pillars. Several elders in the front row went pale, their hands gripping armrests with sudden white-knuckled force. Something old had answered. Something that predated crowns and courts and carefully staged humiliations. Kaylor's face shifted from alarm to cold, calculated fury, and Salis knew with absolute certainty she had just stopped being a problem he could discard. She had become a threat he would have to destroy. The silence that followed Salis's rejection lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then Kaylor moved. He descended from the dais with deliberate precision, each step radiating controlled fury. The crowd parted instinctively, wolves lowering their gazes as he passed. When he stopped mere inches from Salis, using his superior height to loom over her, the mate bond flared with violent heat. Her wolf whimpered, begging her to submit, to apologize, to fix what she'd broken. Salis locked her knees and held his stare. "You dare invoke reciprocal rejection?" Kaylor's voice was soft, deadly. "You who understand nothing of pack law or royal obligation?" "I understand enough," Salis said quietly. Her hands trembled at her sides, but her voice stayed steady. "And I invoke the vow of mirror blood." The effect was instantaneous. The elders surged to their feet. The Eastern envoys exchanged sharp glances. Even Kaylor went still, his expression shifting to something that looked almost like respect before cold calculation replaced it. "That right is outlawed," he said flatly. "It was never formally dissolved." Salis forced the words past the terror clawing at her throat. "If it remains in the founding covenants, it remains enforceable. One question, one answer, on consecrated ground. You cannot refuse without dishonoring your bloodline in front of witnesses from 3 territories." Kaylor's jaw clenched. Behind him, his first beta, Kestrel Marrow, moved forward with practiced efficiency. Where Kaylor radiated raw dominance, Kestrel was all cold precision. A man who solved problems by editing them out of existence. "Your Majesty," Kestrel said smoothly, addressing Kaylor but projecting his voice to the crowd. "The Omega is clearly unstable. Reciprocal rejection has fractured her mind. For her safety and ours, I suggest we end this ceremony immediately and summon the healers." It was expertly done. Reframe her courage as madness, her knowledge as delusion, then remove her before anyone could question the narrative. Salis had seen this pattern before, buried in archive records of wolves who'd challenged authority and been declared unfit, dangerous, disappeared. "No." The word came out harder than Salis intended. She turned to face the crowd directly, speaking past Kaylor to the witnesses who mattered. "The vow of mirror blood requires an answer. Refusal brands the Alpha as ruled by fear, not law. Is that how the Northern Reach presents itself to visiting packs? As a kingdom where oaths bend when they become inconvenient?" Several envoys shifted forward in their seats. One, a silver-haired woman from the Eastern Alliance, watched with sharp, calculating interest. This was exactly what Salis had gambled on. Witnesses meant accountability. Kaylor could destroy her privately, but not here. Not now. Not without exposing the machinery beneath his righteous performance. Kaylor smiled then, and it was a terrible thing. "Ask your question, Salis Quen. Let the moon judge us both." He stepped onto the consecrated stone before the altar, planting his feet with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a battle of words. The crowd leaned forward, anticipation crackling through the hall like lightning before a storm. Saelis's heart hammered against her ribs. She had one chance, one question to split the foundation of his authority. She couldn't ask about the rejection, about his pride or his cruelty. Those were opinions easily defended. She needed something concrete, something that would crack the illusion. Did you order the sable ledger sealed before my bond snapped, yes or no? The hall went deathly quiet. The sable ledger, the registry of old oaths, land seizures, and disappeared bloodlines. The record no one was allowed to access, the truth Kaylor controlled absolutely. Kyler's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. The sable ledger is sealed for reasons of state security, as it has been for decades. The timing of administrative procedures and personal bonds are unrelated matters. Careful, technically truthful, completely evasive. But the moon altar had different standards. The silver inlay didn't blacken this time. Instead, the air itself changed. A cold, metallic scent rolled through the hall, sharp and unmistakable. Not sulfur or smoke, but something older. The smell of lies told on sacred ground. Wolves with sensitive noses recoiled. The Eastern envoy covered her mouth, eyes widening. Even Kaylor's own guards shifted uncomfortably, nostrils flaring. The altar had marked him. Kaylor's face remained carved stone, but Saelis saw the moment his certainty cracked. The crowd had stopped being an audience. They'd become a jury, and the verdict was already whispering through the hall like winter wind through dead branches. The metallic scent of falsehood still hung in the air when Kestrel Marrow stepped forward, a leather document case in his hands. He moved with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this before, who knew exactly how to dismantle a person using nothing but paper and procedure. "Your Majesty," Kestrel said, his voice carrying the weight of regretful duty, "before we proceed further, there is a matter of legal standing that must be addressed." Kaylor nodded, his expression carefully neutral, the perfect king allowing his beta to handle unpleasant necessities. Clean hands. Saelis felt her stomach drop even before Kestrel broke the seal on the documents. "Saelis Quen," Kestrel announced, unrolling parchment stamped with official marks. "As of 3 days prior to this ceremony, you were formally dismissed from service in the Royal Archives for theft of restricted materials. Furthermore, as you possess no family connections to this pack, and your employment was your sole tie to our territory, you are hereby declared outside protection under Northern law." The words hit like physical blows. Outside protection. It was the bureaucratic term for rogue, for wolf without rights, for someone who could be disappeared without consequence. Guards moved forward immediately, hands on weapons, not attacking yet, just surrounding. Procedure. The elders shifted uneasily, but the documents looked official, bore the correct seals. Several began to nod, accepting the narrative because the paperwork was in order. Saelis had spent 3 years filing those papers. She knew what they were supposed to look like, and she knew what they looked like when they were manufactured. "The 16 mark cipher," Saelis said clearly, before the guards could reach her. Kestrel went very still. "I'm sorry," one of the elders asked, confused. Saelis pointed at the document still in Kestrel's hands, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. The signature pattern on those dismissal orders. The spacing between the territorial seal and the date stamp, exactly 16 standard marks. The ink density variation that creates a false aging effect. The witness signatures that all use the same pressure pattern. She met Kestrel's eyes. It's the 16 mark cipher, the archival technique used exclusively for state confiscations and legal erasures. "You're desperate," Kestrel said smoothly, but something had shifted in his posture. "Inventing conspiracies to avoid consequences." "Then let the archive masters examine the documents," Saelis replied. "Let them measure the marks. Let them test the ink. If I'm wrong, I'll submit to any judgment you decree." She turned to face the crowd, speaking to the Eastern envoys now. The 16-mark cipher appears in exactly 47 cases over the past decade. I know because I filed 32 of them. Land disputes where one party suddenly produced ancient claims. Bloodline challenges where witnesses came forward with documentation. Wolf after wolf declared rogue, their property seized, their names erased. All with perfect paperwork. All with the same signature pattern. "This is absurd," Kestrel cut in, his voice hardening. "The Omega is fabricating technical jargon to confuse—" "She's not." The voice came from the elder section. An old man with ink-stained fingers of his own, a former archive master. He stood slowly, his face grave. "The 16-mark cipher is real. It was developed 40 years ago as a standardization protocol for emergency seizures. I helped create it." He paused, looking at the documents in Kestrel's hands with growing horror. It was never meant to be used routinely. It was meant for wartime, for cases where speed mattered more than proper process. The crowd's murmur shifted quality. Not confusion now. Understanding. Awful, clarifying understanding. Another elder stood, then another. Wolves who'd ruled on cases, signed verdicts, accepted official documents without question. They were all looking at Kestrel now, seeing him differently. Not as efficient beta, as architect of erasure. "How many?" the old archive master asked quietly. "How many wolves have been removed using manufactured evidence?" Kestrel's expression remained perfectly controlled, but Salis saw it, the minute tightening around his eyes, the brief flicker of something that might have been fear or fury or both. "These accusations are," he began. "Testable," the Eastern envoy interrupted, standing. "The cipher exists. The pattern exists. If these documents bear its signature, then the question isn't whether the Omega is lying. The question is, how many verdicts in your kingdom are built on paper knives instead of law?" Kaelor finally moved, descending from the dais with measured steps, but he wasn't coming to Kestrel's defense. He was calculating, Salis realized, deciding whether to sacrifice his beta or defend the system. Either choice would cost him. And everyone in the hall knew it. The mate bond should have been dying. That's what reciprocal rejection was supposed to do. Sever the connection cleanly, let both parties walk away free. But something had gone wrong, or perhaps terribly right. Instead of fading, the bond had transformed into something else entirely. Salis felt it first as a spike of rage that wasn't hers, followed by a cold, calculating satisfaction that made her skin crawl. Then images began to bleed through, faint and disjointed. Kestrel's face 3 days ago, nodding at instructions, papers prepared in advance stacked on a desk. The precise timing of her dismissal, calculated to land exactly 1 hour before the ceremony. The bond had become a conduit, not for comfort or connection, but for truth. Kaelor's presence intensified, his alpha dominance rolling through the hall like a physical force. Weaker wolves dropped their gazes immediately, necks baring in instinctive submission. The pressure built and built, crushing down on everyone present, demanding silence, demanding obedience. But the bond kept bleeding. An elder near the front row inhaled sharply, his nostrils flaring. "Moon's mercy," he whispered. The intent. Another wolf, a war captain from the Eastern Territory, tilted her head as if scenting something in the air. Her expression shifted from curiosity to revulsion. "Premeditation," she said softly. "The ceremony wasn't spontaneous. It was staged." Kaelor's eyes snapped to her, and for a moment the dominance pressure doubled. Several wolves in the crowd whimpered, but the damage was done. Wolves sensitive to aura, to the subtle currents of intent that flowed between packmates, were catching the echoes leaking through the mate bond's fractured conduit. They could sense what Kaelor had planned, what he'd always intended. "This is your doing," Kaelor said to Salis, his voice deadly quiet. "You're manipulating the bond, projecting false impressions." "I'm doing nothing," Salis replied, and it was true. She had no control over what the bond was revealing. She could barely stand under the weight of his dominance. every instinct screaming at her to run, to submit, to make the crushing pressure stop. But running would prove him right. Violence would let them brand her rogue aggressor. So Salis did the only thing she could. She stayed. Stood on consecrated ground where the moon's laws predated his authority, and forced Kaelor to remain close enough for the bond to keep echoing. Another image bled through, her own face seen through Kaelor's eyes 3 days ago, not with desire or regret, with cold assessment, target identified, threat quantified, solution prepared. He knew, someone in the crowd breathed. Before the bond even snapped fully, he was already planning her removal. Kaelor's jaw clenched, the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Enough. But the bond pulsed again, sharper this time. A memory of Kestrel asking a question. How permanent do you want this? And Kaela's answer, calm and certain. Permanent enough that no one questions why an Omega thought she could stand beside a king. The Eastern war captain stood abruptly. The bond isn't lying. Intent doesn't lie. He staged everything. Silence! Kaelor's command cracked through the hall like lightning, and half the room flinched. But the other half, the stronger wolves, the territorial leaders, the ones who couldn't be crushed by dominance alone, remained standing, watching. The bond flickered with something new, fear. Not Salis's fear, his. Kestrel moved with sudden urgency, snapping orders to the guards. Remove her, now, under authority of territorial security. The guards advanced, but they moved slowly, reluctantly, uncertain who they were truly serving. Kaelor didn't stop them. The Alpha King who'd spent the entire ceremony preaching about law, about tradition, about the sacred nature of pack hierarchy. He stood silent while his beta ordered a woman erased mid-right on consecrated ground. The Eastern envoy's voice cut through the tension. You're letting this happen. In front of witnesses from 3 territories, you're allowing a wolf to be disappeared during a sacred ceremony. She forfeited protection when she invoked forbidden rites, Kaelor said, but his voice lacked conviction. The bond betrayed him even now, leaking desperation, the sense of a plan unraveling too fast to control. Salis looked at the guards closing in, then at the crowd watching with dawning horror. She could run, shift and flee through the snow-heavy corridors, maybe survive long enough to cross the border. Or she could stay and let them make the mistake everyone would see. The mate bond pulsed one more time, and this time the message was crystal clear. Make her disappear before the bond exposes everything. The hall held its breath. Salis didn't move. The guards were 3 steps away when a voice cut through the hall like winter steel. Stop! Mother Queen Vera rose from her seat in the royal gallery. Throughout the entire ceremony she'd been silent, a composed figure in dark ceremonial robes, so still she might have been carved from the same stone as the pillars. Now every eye turned to her. She was older than Kaelor by decades, her hair silver white, her face lined with the kind of authority that came from surviving court politics longer than most wolves lived. When she descended the gallery stairs, even Kaelor went rigid. Mother, he said carefully, this matter is a violation of every principle this court claims to uphold. Vera's voice carried without strain, each word precise and deliberate. She crossed the hall to stand between Salis and the guards, her movements unhurried. You may not remove this wolf. Kestrel stepped forward. Your Majesty, with respect, she has been declared outside protection. The law is clear. The law is older than your paperwork, Beta Marrow. Vera turned to face the assembled crowd, addressing them rather than Kaelor. I invoke sanctuary of the unclaimed. Let it be witnessed by all present, especially our honoured guests from rival territories. The gasps this time weren't shock. They were recognition. Several of the older wolves in the crowd straightened, murmuring to each other with sudden understanding. That right hasn't been invoked in a century, one of the elders breathed. It was never formally dissolved, Vera replied, echoing Salis's earlier words. Any wolf denied justice under territorial law may claim sanctuary on consecrated ground until a formal inquiry is held. The inquiry must be observed by neutral witnesses. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the eastern envoys. It predates pack borders. It predates kingdoms. It is the oldest protection our kind possesses. Kayla's expression remained carefully blank, but the mate bond flickered with fury and something else. Trapped. The Eastern war captain was already nodding, as were several other territorial witnesses. To refuse sanctuary now would be to declare himself above laws that predated his bloodline. "I accept the sanctuary claim," Kaylor said, his voice measured. "An inquiry will be convened." Relief flooded through Salis so powerfully her knees nearly buckled, but the feeling came with an edge of wrongness, like trust offered by someone who might still be holding a knife. "I claim sanctuary of the unclaimed," Salis said formally, before the moment could pass. Her voice steadied as she continued. "And I request that the inquiry include full access to the Sable Ledger with independent scribes present to document all proceedings. No private counsel. No closed sessions." The hall went quiet. This was the real demand, the one that would either expose the rot or let Kaylor bury it deeper. Kestrel moved to object, but Kaylor raised a hand, silencing him. The Alpha King's expression shifted into something that looked almost like approval, and that was when Salis felt the first true spike of fear. "Granted," Kaylor said, his tone unnervingly calm. "The inquiry will be public. The ledger will be made available for examination. Independent scribes may be appointed by the Eastern Alliance, if they're willing to serve." He was agreeing too easily. The Eastern envoy stood. "We accept the responsibility. Our archivists will arrive within 3 days to begin documentation." "Excellent." Kaylor's smile was cold and perfect. "Then let us adjourn until the inquiry convenes. Salis Quen will remain under sanctuary protection in the Moon's Chapel. Until that time, guards will be posted for her safety." For her safety. The words sounded like a promise but felt like a threat. Vera touched Salis's arm, guiding her toward the chapel entrance with gentle but insistent pressure. As they walked, the older woman leaned close, her voice barely a whisper. "He's going to destroy the evidence before the inquiry begins. You have 3 days, maybe less. Use them." Salis glanced back at Kaylor. He stood on the dais watching her retreat, his expression serene, a king who'd just outmaneuvered an opponent without anyone noticing. The mate bond pulsed once more with absolute clarity, satisfaction, not defeat, not even concern. He'd wanted the inquiry, which meant he'd already prepared for it. Sanctuary would protect Salis's body from immediate erasure, but not from what was coming. Kaylor had just agreed to open the ledger because he'd already decided what truth it would contain, and she had 3 days to figure out how to stop him from rewriting history while she slept in a chapel surrounded by his guards. The relief that had flooded her moments ago curdled into something far more dangerous, the understanding that she'd just traded one trap for another, and this time the bars were invisible. The Moon's Chapel was beautiful in the way prisons sometimes were. High ceilings, silver-threaded tapestries, and guards posted at every entrance for her protection. Salis had spent 2 nights there alone, watching shadows move across stone walls, feeling the weight of sanctuary pressed down like a cage made of ancient law. When the Tribunal of Claw finally convened on the 3rd morning, she understood why Kaylor had agreed so readily. The chamber was smaller than the acceptance hall, deliberately intimate. 5 high-ranking elders sat behind an elevated bench, their ceremonial robes bearing the claw marks of judicial authority. Kaylor sat to the side in a witness chair, projecting the image of a king humble enough to submit to inquiry. Kestrel stood near the scribe's table, organizing documents with meticulous care. The Eastern archivists were present, but positioned too far from the evidence to examine it closely. Witnesses filled the gallery, but only those Kaylor's court had approved. The whole proceeding had the veneer of legitimacy, while being structured to control every possible outcome. The head elder, a severe woman named Magistrate Thorne, opened with formal precision. This inquiry will address specific allegations regarding territorial administration. Testimony will be limited to direct evidence. Speculation will not be entertained. Salis stood in the petitioner's box, exhaustion making her bones ache. She'd spent 2 days trying to prepare, but preparation meant nothing when the battlefield kept shifting beneath her feet. The Omega claims irregularities in archive procedures, Magistrate Thorne continued. Beta Marrow, you may present the administrative records for examination. Kestrel moved forward with a leather case, extracting documents that looked perfect. Too perfect. These are replacement copies, he explained smoothly. The originals were damaged in a storage flood last spring. Standard protocol required clean transcription to preserve the legal record. Convenient. Every document potentially bearing the 16-mark cipher had been replaced with versions that looked legitimate because they were legitimate, freshly created to bury the patterns Salis had exposed. One of the Eastern archivists stood. Were the damaged originals preserved for comparison? Regrettably, no, Kestrel said. Mold contamination required destruction per health protocols. Salis watched the trap close. The tribunal would examine clean records, find nothing suspicious, and declare the inquiry complete. Anyone who'd supported her would be quietly reminded of their poor judgment. The system would protect itself. I don't question the replacement documents, Salis said clearly. I question the pattern they're covering. Magistrate Thorne frowned. You just heard Beta Marrow's explanation. 3 territorial confiscations in the past decade, Salis interrupted, pushing past protocol. The Grey March holdings, the Ironwood estate, the Silver Pine territory. All 3 families declared rogue within weeks of challenging land agreements. All 3 had property seized using emergency protocols. All 3 disappeared from record within a year. Coincidence, Kestrel said calmly. Unfortunate, but not evidence of conspiracy. All 3 cases, Salis continued, her voice strengthening, were processed by the same administrative chain. All 3 had witness testimonies that appeared months after initial judgments, and all 3 families had requested ledger access to verify ancestral claims before being declared rogue. The Eastern archivist leaned forward. That is a pattern. It's a tragedy, Kaylor interjected, his voice heavy with false regret. 3 families made poor choices and suffered consequences, but connecting those incidents to current allegations requires proof, not inference. Then open the Sable Ledger, Salis said. Show the territorial claims those families filed, show the dates they requested access, compare them to the seizure orders. Silence stretched. Magistrate Thorne exchanged glances with her fellow elders, then nodded slowly. The tribunal orders a temporary audit of relevant Sable Ledger entries. The Eastern archivists will verify dates and cross-reference claims. Victory. Small, but real. Then Magistrate Thorne continued. The audit will be conducted by royal custodians under tribunal supervision. Ledger access is restricted to authorized personnel. Results will be presented to this body within 5 days. Salis's stomach dropped. Royal custodians meant wolves who answered to Kaylor. Tribunal supervision meant elders who'd already demonstrated their willingness to accept narrow interpretations. 5 days was more than enough time to alter entries, forge dates, ensure the ledger told whatever story served the throne. The audit wasn't an investigation. It was a scheduled execution of evidence. The Eastern archivist stood again, her voice sharp with suspicion. With respect, Magistrate, independent verification requires independent access. The Sable Ledger contains sensitive information regarding territorial security, Kestrel cut in smoothly. Allowing unrestricted access would compromise ongoing diplomatic relationships. Surely the Eastern Alliance understands the need for discretion. It was masterfully done. Refuse, and the Eastern Wolves looked like they were overstepping territorial boundaries. Accept, and they watched Kaylor destroy proof while pretending to cooperate. Magistrate Thorne struck her gavel. The audit will proceed as ordered. This tribunal stands adjourned until results are presented. Kaylor caught Salus's eye as the chamber emptied, and his expression held no triumph, just cold certainty. He'd given her exactly what she'd asked for. An audit, an investigation, the appearance of transparency, knowing it would accomplish nothing. The guards moved to escort Salus back to sanctuary. As she passed the scribe's table, she glimpsed Kestrel's hand resting on the leather case of replacement documents. His fingers were ink-stained. Fresh ink. The sanctuary attendant came to Salus on the fourth night, a young woman barely past her first shift who worked in the lower archives. She moved through the chapel's side entrance like a shadow, her hands trembling as she pressed a folded note into Salus's palm. "I shouldn't be here," the girl whispered, "but you need to know. Beta Marrow has scribes working through the night. They're re-inking the ledger, calling it preservation, but..." She swallowed hard. "They're changing dates, altering entries, making it match the story they want told." Salus's hands clenched around the note. "How many scribes?" "4. All low-ranked. All threatened with dismissal if they refuse." The attendant's voice cracked. "One of them is my brother. He's terrified, but he doesn't know what else to do. None of us do." After the girl fled back into the darkness, Salus sat alone in the chapel's cold silence. The note contained names, locations, a schedule of when the ledger was being accessed. Evidence that would mean nothing if Kaylor controlled who examined it. Proof that would vanish the moment it became inconvenient. Desperation clawed at her throat, threatening to transform into the kind of panic that made people surrender. But somewhere beneath the fear, something harder crystallized. Resolve. The understanding that moving first meant accepting costs she couldn't yet calculate. Kaylor came to her the next morning. He arrived without guards, without ceremony, entering the chapel as dawn light filtered through the stained glass windows. He looked almost kind, his expression softened by concern that might have been genuine if Salus hadn't learned to recognize performance. "This has gone far enough," he said quietly, sitting across from her in one of the prayer pews. "You've made your point. The court has heard your grievances. Now, let's end this before more wolves are hurt." "More wolves," Salus repeated. "You mean the scribes being forced to alter records?" Kaylor's jaw tightened briefly, then smoothed. "I mean wolves caught between loyalty and fear. The young woman who visited you last night, for instance. Her brother. The attendants who've been passing you information." He paused, letting the implications settle. "Withdraw your sanctuary claim. Accept exile with full compensation. Land, gold, enough to build a comfortable life far from court politics. In return, I'll ensure no action is taken against those who aided you." It was seduction dressed as mercy, surrender wrapped in protection. Take the easy path and everyone stays safe. Refuse, and watch people suffer for your stubbornness. "You're offering me a bribe to let you destroy the truth," Salus said. "I'm offering you survival," Kaylor corrected. "For yourself, and for wolves who don't deserve to be caught in this conflict. You can't win this fight, Salus. The tribunal answers to tradition. Tradition is written by those in power, and I am that power. All you're doing is prolonging pain." The mate bond pulsed faintly between them, a ghost of connection that leaked his certainty. He believed what he was saying, believed he was being reasonable, even generous. Salus stood and her voice came out stronger than she felt. "I invoke custody petition." Kaylor went very still. "What?" "It's an old mechanism, older than your audit procedures. Any wolf may petition for neutral stewardship of disputed records until formal inquiry concludes. I request temporary custody be transferred from royal administration to independent archivists selected by the Eastern Alliance." "That's..." Kaylor started, then stopped, recalculating. "That would require tribunal approval." "Then let them vote on it. Publicly. Let the Eastern witnesses see whether this court truly wants truth or just the appearance of investigation. For a long moment, Kaelor simply looked at her. Then he smiled, and the expression made Saelis's blood run cold. "Very well," he said softly. "The tribunal will convene at dawn to consider your petition. I'm sure they'll give it all due consideration." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing through the chapel with unhurried confidence. Saelis sank back onto the pew, her hands shaking now that he was gone. She'd done it. Forced the custody question onto the formal agenda, made it something that had to be addressed in front of witnesses. But Kayla's smile haunted her. He'd looked pleased, almost satisfied, like she'd played exactly the move he'd been hoping for. As night fell, Saelis heard something that made her stomach clench with dread. Boots in the snow outside the sanctuary, multiple sets moving with military precision, orders given in low voices, the sound of crates being loaded onto carts. Someone was moving the ledger. Right now, under cover of darkness, while she sat trapped in sanctuary protection. The tribunal would vote at dawn on custody of records that might not exist anymore by the time the sun rose. Dawn came too quickly and brought no answers. Saelis entered the tribunal chamber with evidence she'd gathered through the night, testimony from terrified scribes, dates that didn't align, a pattern so clear it should have been undeniable. But she'd learned that truth only mattered if people were willing to see it. The Eastern archivists had worked through the night as well. When they presented their preliminary findings, the room went silent. The 16-mark cipher appears in 17 cases over the past 8 years, the lead archivist announced, her voice clinical. Not 47 as originally claimed, but enough to establish pattern. More concerning, the Sable Ledger's preservation seals show tampering. The wax bears correct insignias, but carbon dating reveals recent application. Someone has been accessing sealed sections repeatedly. Magistrate Thorne's expression remained neutral, but her fingers drummed once against the bench. "Beta Marrow, explain the seal discrepancies." Kestrel stood, his composure perfect. "Routine maintenance requires periodic access. The seals are replaced during authorized inspections to ensure document integrity. Standard archival procedure." "Who authorizes those inspections?" the Eastern archivist asked. "The Crown," Kestrel replied smoothly. Saelis felt the trap closing, not around her this time, but around the court itself. The Eastern witnesses were seeing it now, a system where the accused controlled the evidence, authorized the inspections, and decided what truth looked like. Before Magistrate Thorne could deflect, Saelis spoke. "The seal on the Grey March confiscation entry was replaced 6 weeks ago. The Grey March family was declared rogue 9 years ago. Why would a 9-year-old entry require fresh preservation?" Silence stretched. Several elders exchanged uncomfortable glances. Then Kaela stood, and his voice carried weight of careful decision. "Perhaps it's time for transparency." He turned to face Kestrel with an expression of disappointed resolve. "I have tolerated efficiency in administration, but if that efficiency has crossed into impropriety, it must be addressed. Beta Marrow, did you exceed your authority in managing archival procedures?" It was masterfully done. Kaelor was offering Kestrel as sacrifice, one corrupt official, acting alone while the king remained untarnished. If the tribunal accepted this narrative, the system would survive. The machine would continue. Saelis would become a footnote. The Omega, who exposed one bad beta, then disappeared into exile. "No," Saelis said, her voice cutting through the staged confession. "This isn't about one corrupt official. This is about who benefits when wolves disappear from record." Kayla's eyes turned cold. "You have your vindication. Beta Marrow will face— 3 families lost their territories," Saelis interrupted, pushing past protocol. "All 3 territories border the Crown's hunting reserves. All 3 were absorbed into royal holdings after the families were declared rogue. The pattern isn't corruption. It's expansion, disguised as law enforcement. The The Eastern War Captain surged to her feet. "Are you claiming the Crown orchestrated false accusations to seize land? I'm asking who profits when documentation disappears." Salis turned to face Kaylor directly. "And I'm requesting severance by witness." The gasps were immediate. Even Magistrate Thorne looked stunned. "That right is," one elder began, "applicable when a mate bond is used as leverage or weapon," Salis finished. "The bond hasn't severed cleanly because it's being maintained through proximity and intent. As long as it exists, it creates a conduit that can be manipulated. I request formal severance under witness observation." Kaylor's expression transformed into something dangerous. "You would sever the bond to avoid accountability for your accusations. I would sever it to stop you from using it as a leash." The tribunal convened in hurried whispers. The Eastern archivists watched with barely concealed fascination. This had stopped being a procedural inquiry. It was becoming a public dismantling of power itself. Magistrate Thorne struck her gavel. "The tribunal grants provisional stewardship of unclaimed archival records to a neutral committee pending full investigation. We also approve the severance by witness request to be conducted under formal observation." Victory. Partial, fragile, but real. Then Kaylor spoke, his voice carrying terrible certainty. "I invoke Crown emergency under territorial security provisions. The ruling is suspended pending Crown review." The room erupted. Crown emergency was a wartime power, meant for invasion or catastrophic threat. Using it here was admitting he would break every norm, every tradition, every rule to maintain control. "You can't," Magistrate Thorne began. "I can, and I am," Kaylor said calmly. "The records in question contain sensitive information regarding territorial defense. Their release poses existential risk. Until that risk is assessed, all custody decisions are suspended." He looked at Salis with something that might have been respect or might have been fury. "You wanted to expose the machine. Congratulations. Now everyone sees exactly what I'm willing to do to protect it." The Crown emergency lasted 3 days. 3 days of Kaylor's guards surrounding the archive chambers, of scribes being relocated for their safety, of the Eastern witnesses confined to guest quarters under the pretense of protection. 3 days of watching the machine tighten its grip while Salis remained trapped in sanctuary, powerless to stop the slow erasure of everything she'd fought for. On the 4th morning, Kaylor made his final move. He convened the tribunal again, but this time the chamber was packed with territorial nobles, war captains, and officials who'd received direct summons. The message was clear. This wasn't a legal proceeding anymore. It was a demonstration of power. "The Crown emergency assessment is complete," Kaylor announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. "The unclaimed archives are hereby declared state property under territorial security provisions. Any attempt to access, copy, or reference these materials without Crown authorization will be treated as sedition." Salis watched the trap complete itself. He wasn't just protecting the records. He was weaponizing them. Anyone who tried to file a claim, prove ancestry, or challenge a verdict would be branded an agitator against the realm. "Furthermore," Kaylor continued, "all previous tribunal rulings regarding custody are void. The investigation into administrative procedures has found isolated incidents of overzealous enforcement, which Beta Marrow has been disciplined for. The matter is closed." Kestrel stood beside the throne, chastened in appearance but still present, still powerful. The sacrifice had been rejected, and the machine had closed ranks to protect itself. The Eastern war captain stood, her voice sharp with barely controlled fury. "This is tyranny dressed as law." "This is sovereignty," Kaylor corrected. "Every territory protects its internal records. The Eastern Alliance does the same. You may disagree with my methods, but you cannot deny my authority within my own borders." He was right, and that was the most vicious part. By pack law, by territorial tradition, an Alpha King's authority over his own land was absolute. The Eastern witnesses could protest, could report what they'd seen, but they couldn't stop him, unless Salis forced one final move. "I invoke severance by witness," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Not as a private right, as a legal verdict." Kayla's gaze snapped to her, and for the first time she saw genuine alarm flicker across his features. "The mate bond has been weaponized," Salis continued, addressing the Eastern witnesses now. "It's been used to pressure, to control, to leak information that serves the Crown's interests. Under ancient law, a bond corrupted by power must be severed publicly, so the corruption cannot spread. I request witnesses from 3 territories to observe and validate the severance." "This is desperation," Kayla said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. "This is documentation," Salis countered, "a spiritual legal record that cannot be sealed, altered, or erased. When the bond severs under witness observation, it creates permanent testimony. Everyone here will carry the mark of what happened, what you did, what you tried to hide." Magistrate Thorne looked between them, then at the Eastern delegation. Finally, she nodded. "The request is valid. Severance by witness will proceed." The ritual was brutal in its simplicity. No ceremony, no gentle transition. Salis stood in the center of the chamber while 3 witnesses from different territories formed a triangle around her. They placed their hands over their hearts, becoming conduits for the observation. Then she spoke the words of formal severance, and the bond tore. It felt like a piece of her soul ripping away, leaving a scar that would never fully heal. The pain drove her to her knees, and she tasted blood from biting through her lip. But she didn't scream, didn't give Kaylor the satisfaction of seeing her break. When the agony faded, the silence that remained was absolute. The constant pull toward Kaylor, the awareness of his presence, the echo of his intent, all gone. Just clean, empty freedom that hurt more than she'd expected. "I claim jurisdictional authority over unclaimed records," Salis said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Not as personal property, as public trust. I establish the Archive Court, a neutral forum where any wolf, regardless of rank or territory, may file claims without fear of erasure. Witness validation from the Eastern Alliance is requested." The Eastern War Captain stepped forward immediately. "The Eastern Alliance recognizes the Archive Court as neutral ground. We will send archivists to assist in its establishment." Other voices joined. Representatives from smaller territories who'd watched Kaylor's display of absolute power and realized they could be next. Kaylor stood motionless, and Salis finally understood the look on his face. Not defeat. Calculation. He'd lost control of the truth today, lost the ability to quietly erase inconvenient wolves. But he was already planning the next war. "The Archive Court exists only because I permit it," Kaylor said softly. "Remember that, Salis. The moment it becomes a threat to territorial security, to pack stability, to the safety of my wolves, it ends. And so do you." Salis met his gaze across the snow-dusted chamber. The mate bond was gone, but the understanding between them remained. She'd created something he couldn't easily destroy without exposing himself further. But he would try. Through laws, through famine, through border disputes and convenient accidents. "Then you'd better be thorough," Salis replied quietly, "because I won't disappear quietly. Not anymore." She walked from the chamber with Eastern witnesses flanking her, no longer trapped in sanctuary but not truly free either. She'd built something that threatened every corrupt throne in the realm, and now she'd have to defend it against all of them.